My name is Connie Mildred Cragun Belknap, and it has been my desire for quite some time now to sit down with my mother, Mildred Reese Cragun, and to have an informal chat with her about some of the important events that have happened in her life, so that we as her children can enjoy these very precious things told in her own voice for many years to come. Maybe we can begin, Mom, by asking you to tell us about your earliest memories of your home and your family.
Well, a beautiful storybook house set on a hill, surrounded by tall, stately pine trees that seemed to stretch and spread their branches to the sky in prayer to heaven. The poem, Only God Can Make a Tree, was written for these beautiful trees, which grew and protected the humble household of Reuben Thomas Reese, my father, and my mother, Mary Rebecca Tucker. Nestled at the foot of Ben Lomond in the little town of Pleasant View in Weaver County, Utah. What a firm foundation and setting for a little auburn-haired baby girl that came to live in that storybook house on the hill. Yes, I became that, a part of this loving family. My mother held me close, and my father thanked our Father in heaven for my safe arrival. My sisters, Lucille, Mary, Helen, and Flora, and my brothers, Reuben and Earl, stood around the bed of my mother in that picturesque, sweet bedroom on the 5th day of November, 1907. And they, too, seemed overjoyed with their new little baby sister. I was given the name of Mildred. As a little girl, I spent a happy childhood playing among the beautiful trees and spacious lawns, and the beds of colorful flowers that surrounded the storybook house. What a glorious, protected world for a little girl to grow up in. The gay laughter of my brothers and sisters taught me to love one another. The good, firm, everyday lessons teaching me the commandments of God, and now to live by them that were taught to me by those loving parents made me love the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and love to serve my Heavenly Father. My first remembrance of my childhood, I think, goes back to the time that my little sister, Pearl, passed away. She was just younger than I, and she was a year and a half old. And I remember in our beautiful home that we called the parlor, her beautiful casket stood among beautiful flowers. And I can remember being held out to look at my little sister by my kind father. And as the crowd came and visited there in our lovely home, I can remember I was just a toddler, and I had picked up 2 safety pins that were fastened together. And as I ran from our dining room into the parlor, I would keep moving these safety pins up and down. I think that was my first remembrance of my childhood. I can't pass by the wonderful companionship I had with my brothers. I was very, very lucky. I think the most lucky member of our family, because I was the only one that had big brothers. My 4 sisters were older than I, and they were real companions for one another, but they didn't have big brothers. And I remember so well when my brother Reuben and Earl were planning on saving their pennies and sending back to the Montgomery Ward for cowboy suits. And they also saved their pennies and their dimes so that they could buy me an Indian suit to be sent along with theirs. Yes, I loved my brothers. I had my 2 older brothers, and then I was blessed with having, I was doubly blessed with Raymond, a younger brother. I guess I must have been really what you might call a tomboy along with the boys, because they were very kind to me, and they never seemed to tire taking me with them where they went. I jumped fences, and I brought home the cows from the pasture, and then I can remember so well as we would stop along the way and pick a few violets to take home to our dear mother. Yes, I can remember too, as the boys, my brothers were disciplined, and Reuben especially, that loved to run away and go out to Place Hot Springs and swim. And he was cautioned many times that he must not do this without asking. And I remember so well that when he would come home and I knew he was to be punished, I would go up into my bedroom and shut the door so I couldn't hear the discipline that went on with my loving brother Reuben. Well, Connie, what would you like me to talk about next?
Mom, how do you remember your father and mother, Grandpa and Grandma Reese? What did they look like? What were some of the traditions of their time as far as clothing and just in general, how do you remember your mom and dad?
Well, my mother was a short, my mother wasn't very tall. In fact, I always liked to walk down the street with Mother, because then I felt that I was quite tall, and I'm really not. She was tiny and petite and loving and understanding. She always wanted to look nice, and I can remember her telling of when she first met my father, and my grandfather, Mother's father, owned a sawmill in the mountains down near Sanpete County, and she spent much of her time in helping at the sawmill, cooking for the men. And she had made a visit up here to Pleasant View to visit her mother's sister, Aunt Mary Maycock. And while she was up here in Pleasant View, she met my father. And it's been so fun to listen to him tell how she loved pink, and she was wearing a pink gingham dress the day he met her. And as she came through the gate from Aunt Mary's, he thought how lovely she looked and how pretty she was with her black hair and her pretty pink gingham dress. And then their romance continued, and he visited the sawmill several times. And lucky me, they were married. Mother was always called Aunt Molly because our house, our big home, 15 rooms, were always open for the family's friends. Everyone called her Aunt Molly and knew that they were welcome within the doors of our lovely home. She would make pies. I was going to say the dozens, but many, many pies to have on hand when all these friends came. And they were always anxious to spend time with Aunt Molly in her lovely home. Mother was always very active, did church work. Seemed like she could find time, even in her busy world, raising a family of 8, to still serve the Lord and set an example for us. When I talk about my mother, there's so much that could be said about her. She was so gracious, so kind, and loving. My dad stood very tall and stalwart, always throwing his shoulders back and walking very, very straight. He was a very deep thinker, and so many times we, as children, would wonder what he was thinking as he sat by the table with his chair, the back to the light, and read. Father was a well-educated man, although he, I don't think, went beyond about the 4th or 5th grade in school.
Is that right?
And he educated himself. He was really a self-made man. I can remember him teaching me how to spell out of the magazine, The World's Work. And he took all these books that would help him to gain an education. And he certainly was rated as one that had had a complete college education and beyond that, because he was a representative of Utah in the Capitol building in Salt Lake, in our capital. We were very proud of Dad. He was a bishop for 15 years and taught us so many, many things to build for us a firm foundation in the gospel. We always had family prayers. We turn our chairs with the backs to the table and kneel around the table and have our family prayer morning and night. He had a sense of humor. Many people figured that he was quite a quiet, sober type, but they didn't know the real Dad that we knew. He really had a fine sense of humor. And he loved us all so very, very much and taught us so many lessons. I can remember him saying that for us to keep ourselves off the bargain counter. And he cautioned us about the things that we should do. And little things that he'd tell us was when we dated to always take enough money with us that we could find our way home in case we needed to.
That must be where I got the idea of taking a dime with me every time I went on a date or was going to be away from home, so that I could call home in case I needed you.
Probably so. And, well, Connie, maybe there's other fields that I'm overlapping.
What about Grandpa's red mustache?
Oh, yes, I must tell you that. I have always had auburn hair, and I've heard the older members of the family say that Mother would say, "Oh, my little red-headed Mildred." I think I was the only one in the family that Dad nicknamed, and he called me Millie. Dad's mustache was red, like my hair, and people would say to me, "Where did you get your red hair?" I'd say, "From my daddy's mustache." And it was really something because he had coal black hair, but a red mustache. So I've been proud of my red hair for that reason. Connie?
What about Grandpa being a beekeeper?
Oh, yes, that just opens up such a big field. He was the largest beekeeper in Utah. And his business extended to Idaho also. And we were taught very young to work. We would wire frames, put in foundation, and maybe you don't know what this all means, but it correlates with the frames, making the frames and fixing them ready for the bees to fill with honey. He taught us to really work, and this I have been always grateful for. He let us know, taught us the real value of money. And I can remember I worked all summer wiring frames to buy a Japanese umbrella that I had my eyes on in town, in Ogden. And the season for Chinese umbrellas to shade you was practically over before I earned the money enough to go and buy it. But it was beautiful. I can remember right to this day how proud I was when I could go and bring my Japanese umbrella home. And he believed that we shouldn't have anything better than what our neighbors had. Father was really financially, well, what do I want to call it? Secure. That's a good word. But he never let us know but what we were among those that were wanting the most, because he knew it was another good lesson for us to learn.
I think you told me at one time that Grandpa having the first horseless carriage in Pleasant View.
Yes, he was numbered among those. He had, I guess it was called Model T Ford, and we were very proud of that. It was among one of the first automobiles. But as time went on, they became more plentiful and more of them. My mother yearned for a blue Buick, and she always said, "Oh, I would love a blue Buick." And she never got it because he was teaching her too, I guess, that she wasn't to have any more than what her loved ones and her neighbors could afford. Well, ask me some more questions.
I'd be interested in knowing maybe what was a typical day in your life, Mom, as you grew up in your home here in Pleasant View.
Well, I can always remember we'd start out our day with having our breakfast, which consisted of whole wheat cereal that had been cooked on the old coal stove, and there was always 3 kettles, one stacked, one on top of the other. And the middle one contained the wheat, and the bottom one was the water, and the other one on top acted more as well, there was water in that too. I think it was to just make sure that the wheat was steamed and not boiled. And that was always our mush. All the time we were growing up, we had our whole wheat mush. And then we had our breakfast, and like I had said before, our morning prayer. My dad always had a lot of men that worked for him in the bees, but when they'd ask him the night before what they were to do the next day, he'd always say, "We'll have to wait till after breakfast." And then I can see him with all the men around him, and with him in the center with a stick drawing the plans in the dirt out in front of the shop, placing each man where he knew he was to work for the day. Well, when you talk about a typical day, I think in the house, after Father had got all his men working, Mother would see that we had plenty to do too. We had to make bee veils, and we had a big family. We had 2 big baskets of ironing every time we washed, and we'd keep 2 irons going, and they were the old-fashioned irons that we'd have to heat on top of the stove. But it was a glorious time. Mother taught us to cook, and I'm still using recipes that my mom had us use, taught us to cook from. The old pantry is a happy memory. The light that came in from that pantry was from a skylight. That part of the pantry had this skylight where the sun would shine through, and that would light up our pantry where we would work.
What were some of your responsibilities at home? Some of the things that were Mildred Reese's responsibilities and things that you had to do on a regular schedule.
Well, when I was small, I had these 4 older sisters, and I just like to spend most of my time playing with my neighbors, and I know
Typical child.
Yes, and I know Mother really hated to send me on an errand because I loved people so much that I would be gone most of the day before I'd return. I remember going up to Aunt Neil Reese's. We always got our butter up there. She churned, and she'd make it into the molds, butter molds that would be about 2 inches deep and about 6 inches long, and she'd always wrap it in funny papers because she knew I loved to read the funny papers. And on the way home, I'd sit along the bank and eat a little butter and read the funny papers. And so it'd take me a long time to get the butter from Aunt Nell's. And then I know I must have really been a lazy little rascal because I just love to follow the boys around and do anything but stay in the house and do the things I was supposed to. But as time went on, I did have my tasks signed out to me. We took turns. Friday was always the day that we'd clean the upstairs. And I can remember I really loved those days because I could be up there all alone, and I was always playing. I was in a show, and most dramatic tragedies, and many times Mother would call up and say, "Are you all right?" Because I'd be playing these shows, and I'd be crying, or I'd be doing something. They became so real to me, and I guess maybe that's where I really learned to love dramatics, and which I was really involved in our ward, as I played the leading lady in our three-act plays for several years. But it was a lot. It holds a lot of wonderful memories. We had our wash days down in the basement, and I guess I must be getting pretty old because I remember helping do the washing and scrubbing on the scrubbing board. And Mother had the big boiler on the stove that they would put lye in to keep the white clothes white. And she had a long stick, but it was round. Dad had made it round, and this was the stick that we'd stir the clothes around in the boiling water, and take them out and put them in the tubs from there, and then we'd go on and finish up scrubbing on the scrubbing board. I must say, the clothes, I think, were whiter than the electric washers do nowadays.
That's something.
Yeah.
Huh. You've talked about enjoying dramatics when you were young, and I wanted to ask you what maybe you could describe for us some of your church activities that you were involved in as a youth. Can you remember? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you met Daddy.
Well, that was a good question to bring up when we talk about dramatics. I can remember, really, though, my first calling into hold a real office in the church was when I was 13, and I was called to be assistant secretary to Diane Johns in the MIA, and I was just ready to start my own classwork there, but I was the secretary, assistant secretary, and from then on out, I really had a wonderful career in church work. I think I have served I know I have in every organization in the church. But back to dramatics. It was really, the dramatics really close to my heart, because I have to connect Earl up with dramatics, because when I was 19, I fell in love with Earl, this good Latter-day Saint fellow. He'd always been, he was born here in Pleasant View, just like I was. So when you say, when did you meet him, I've always known him. And there was never, I do remember at the time when they were living in Sequa, Idaho, and he was to be born, and he came back down to Grandma and Grandpa Budge's to be born. And I remember they went back up to Asika, and then they decided to move back down here. His mother, Cragun, bless her heart, just couldn't wean herself away from Pleasant View. And I remember hearing them say that they had